In the quiet town of Frost Hollow, where winter's grip never seems to loosen, Officer Caleb Rowan and his German Shepherd Axel share a bond forged in the harshest of circumstances. But when a young boy named Noah stumbles into their lives seeking help for his beaten mother, Caleb and Axel are thrust into a life-or-death rescue mission. As the snowstorm rages on, a dark secret begins to unravel, revealing a criminal web far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Will they make it in time to save Maya? Watch the heart-stopping moment that will change everything for them. Frost Hollow was a town where time seemed to slow, especially when the winter descended. The chill of the season wrapped the town in a quiet, unbroken silence. Snow fell in soft sheets, coating the trees and buildings, transforming the streets into an endless white canvas. It was a place where the sun rarely broke through the clouds, and when it did, it cast a pale, muted light over the town's small, rustic buildings. The wind whispered through the tall pine trees that lined the roads, a constant shivering reminder of the harsh cold that settled in. The town itself was tucked away far from the hustle and bustle of larger cities, hidden in the embrace of snowy hills and a dense forest. The few houses that dotted the landscape were simple, weather-worn structures, most of them with thick smoke rising from chimneys as families huddled inside seeking warmth. The streets were narrow, winding around corners with barely enough space for a car to pass through, especially during the thick snowstorms that frequently visited. In the midst of this isolated tranquility lived Officer Caleb Rowan. A man of few words, Caleb had a demeanor that matched the town he protected, stoic, steady, and unwavering. At 36, he had seen enough to understand the weight of silence both in the field and in life. His posture was always straight, his face often unreadable, and his eyes, stormy gray, seemed to constantly scan his surroundings, searching for danger even in the calmest moments. His past, shaped by years in the military police, had left him with more scars than he cared to acknowledge. Some of them were visible, those that marked his body, but the deeper ones were hidden beneath the surface reminders of missions gone wrong and lives lost. His past had forged him into the officer he was today, a man who believed in action more than words, and duty more than accolades. By his side was Axel, his loyal German shepherd. Axel had been Caleb's partner through thick and thin, from the military to the civilian life of Frost Hollow. The dog's fur was a deep sable, his eyes sharp and golden, always alert to his surroundings. Despite the scar on his right shoulder, a reminder of a bullet that had nearly ended his service, Axel's spirit was far from broken. He was as much a soldier as Caleb, his body honed for protection, his mind trained to serve. Axel had been through every step of Caleb's journey, always there, a quiet sentinel who watched over him no matter the storm or the hardship. Together they were an inseparable team, a reminder of resilience and loyalty. But Frost Hollow, with its quiet streets and small-town charm, had always been a place of peace for Caleb. He had come here to escape, to find solace in the simplicity of life. He had hoped that this place, with its endless winter and small community, would offer him the peace that had eluded him for so long. But even in the stillness of Frost Hollow, nothing remained the same forever. The storm that had settled over Frost Hollow seemed to grow heavier as the night wore on. The snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, obscuring the view through Caleb's windshield. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, the silence in the car only broken by the hum of the engine and the soft crackle of the radio. Axel sat beside him, his body tense but calm, as if the dog was somehow attuned to the stillness that enveloped them. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Caleb noticed a blur of movement, a small figure stumbling through the snow, running towards him with an urgency that seemed out of place in the quiet of the night. Before Caleb could react, the boy reached the headlights, his face streaked with tears, his breath coming out in frantic gasps that clouded in the icy air. "Help! Please help!" the boy cried, his voice breaking as he collapsed onto the snow in front of Caleb's vehicle. "They beat my mama. She's dying." Caleb slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the icy road, the patrol SUV coming to a halt just in time to avoid hitting the boy. Axel's ears shot up, his body stiffening as he let out a sharp bark, a sound that seemed to cut through the chill air and the boy's frantic sobs. Caleb threw the door open, his boots crunching loudly in the snow as he rushed to the boy's side. The child was no older than 9, his small frame trembling from the cold and fear. His brown hair was matted to his forehead, his thin shirt torn at the sleeve, exposing a pale arm that trembled in Caleb's grip. Blood stained the sleeve of his shirt, dark, fresh blood that left a stain on the snow beneath him. Caleb dropped to his knees beside the boy, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Easy, son. You're safe now. What's your name?" Noah's face, streaked with tears, looked up at Caleb with wide, frightened eyes. "Noah. Noah Reed," the boy stammered, trying to catch his breath. "She's hurt. Badly." Caleb's heart clenched. "Where is she, Noah? Where's your mom?" Noah's trembling hand pointed into the dark woods behind him towards a trailer park just beyond the tree line. "Back there, she can't move. They did something to her. She—" His voice broke again, the words tangled in fear and desperation. Caleb's mind raced, but his body moved on instinct. He knew there wasn't time to waste. "It's okay, we're going to get her help. You're going to be all right." Caleb lifted the boy into his arms, carrying him swiftly to the SUV. Axel followed close behind his nose, twitching his eyes trained on the boy, sensing the gravity of the situation. As Caleb settled Noah into the back seat of the car, the dog stood by, watching them both with an intensity that only a K9 could possess. The warmth of the SUV's heater was a sharp contrast to the cold that still gripped the boy's body. Noah's small hands trembled, and he hugged himself tightly, shivering from more than just the cold. Axel, sensing the unease, hopped into the back seat beside Noah, his body naturally curling protectively around the boy. For a moment, the car was quiet, except for Noah's shallow breathing and the low hum of the heater. Then, just as the boy's trembling slowed, something small slid from his pocket and fell to the floor. Caleb glanced down. It was a photograph, creased and half-torn. He picked it up carefully, recognizing a young woman with soft brown hair, a gentle smile, holding Noah in front of a rundown garage. The picture seemed worn smooth from being held too often, the edges frayed with time. "Is this your mom?" Caleb asked gently, handing the picture back to Noah. The boy nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Her name's Maya. She works at a garage by the highway, but she said not to tell anyone about him." His eyes darted away, his voice dropping. "Her boyfriend, Travis." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "You're safe now, Noah. We'll find her. Just stay with me, okay?" Noah nodded, still clutching the photo tightly in his small hands. Axel, noticing the boy's distress, gently nudged him with his nose. The boy's eyes met Axel's, and for a moment the trembling slowed. A small, almost imperceptible smile flickered across Noah's face as he placed a hand on Axel's head. Caleb started the engine, the snow falling heavier now as they drove toward the trailer park. The storm had swallowed Frost Hollow, and with every mile they covered, the weight of the situation pressed harder against Caleb's chest. His focus sharpened, his grip tightening on the wheel. Time was running out, and Caleb knew the danger was far from over. Caleb drove through the storm, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was miles away, consumed by the image of the boy huddled in the back seat. The snow outside fell thicker now, covering the road in a heavy blanket of white, making the night feel even darker, more oppressive. The tires of the SUV crunched through the ice as Caleb steered the vehicle down the narrow road, the wind howling outside, but inside the car it was oddly still except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional sniffle from Noah. Noah sat there staring at the photo of his mother, Maya. The picture crinkled from being held too many times, and tears still wet on his cheeks. Caleb could see the boy's fear, but there was something else there too, a quiet hope flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. He didn't speak at first, just clutched the photograph like it was the last thing connecting him to his mother. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, Noah's small voice broke through the hum of the engine. "My mom, she works at a garage by the highway, and it's just up the road a little bit. She said not to tell anyone about Travis, but she's scared of him, he's not a good man." Caleb glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Noah's eyes, though the boy quickly looked away. He could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air between them. "Tell me about Travis," Caleb said softly, keeping his voice even. Noah's voice faltered, but he continued, his words rushed as if spilling out of him all at once. He gets angry a lot. He drinks, and when he does, he doesn't stop. He says bad things, and sometimes he hits Mom. She says he'll change, that he's just upset, but I don't think he will." Noah's voice cracked as he wiped at his eyes, trying to hide the tears that kept slipping down his cheeks. He said if she ever told anyone about him, he'd hurt her for real. Caleb's jaw tightened as he listened, his grip on the steering wheel tightening too. Travis Holt. The name rang a bell in Caleb's mind. He knew of him. Local trouble, a man with a history of disorderly conduct and suspicions of illegal activities, but nothing solid enough for a real charge. Now it seemed Caleb was about to find out how dangerous Holt really was. "Don't worry, Noah," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. "We're going to get her the help she needs. You're safe now, and we're going to find her." Axel, ever alert, shifted in the passenger seat, his ears pricked up and eyes scanning the darkness outside. The dog seemed to sense the rising tension in the car, his body tense, though he stayed silent, watching over Noah like a guardian. The miles seemed to stretch longer, the storm closing in tighter, the wind howling as it whipped the snow into blinding swirls. Caleb's thoughts were racing. Every moment spent on this road could mean the difference between life and death for Maya. He glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away. Noah had fallen silent again, staring out the window as the world outside became more and more shrouded in snow. The town was so small and the roads so winding that Caleb had to fight every instinct to push the pedal harder. He knew they were close, but each twist of the road felt like it brought them further into the unknown. A feeling gnawed at Caleb's chest. This wasn't just a routine rescue mission. There was something bigger, darker at play here. His instincts told him that whatever Travis Holt had been involved in, it went deeper than just a troubled relationship. As they neared the trailer park, Caleb slowed the SUV, his eyes scanning the path ahead. He had a gut feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Axel shifted beside him, his low growl vibrating through the air. The dog was on high alert, and Caleb could see the tension in his partner's muscles. They were close now, and Caleb could feel it. The storm had masked the sounds, but he knew that whatever waited ahead would be far from what he had prepared for. The headlights of the SUV sliced through the snowstorm, illuminating the path ahead as Caleb slowed to a crawl, approaching the old abandoned trailer park. The cold air was thick with the scent of pine and frost, but there was something heavier now, a sense of urgency that made Caleb's pulse quicken. He could see the faded trailers ahead, their windows boarded up, the once vibrant colors now muted under layers of snow and neglect. The entire place felt like a forgotten part of the world, and yet something told Caleb that this forgotten corner was hiding much more than it appeared. Axel, sensing the tension, sat upright, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The German shepherd's golden eyes were locked on the surroundings, scanning the dark shadows behind the trailers, his body taut and ready for anything. Caleb knew Axel well enough to understand that his dog was on high alert. This wasn't just a routine search. The storm howled louder as they pulled into the clearing, the snow thick enough to obscure the view, but not thick enough to completely block out the eerie stillness that surrounded them. Caleb parked the SUV close to a rundown trailer, its door hanging loosely, barely hanging on its hinges. The dim light from the headlights illuminated the tracks in the snow, evidence of something recent. Someone had been here not long ago. "Stay close, Noah," Caleb said, softly, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. The boy, still clutching the photograph of his mother, nodded, his small frame shaking slightly in the cold, but his eyes were focused, determined. Caleb could feel Noah's fear, but there was also something else in the boy's gaze. An unwavering trust, a hope that Caleb would do what needed to be done. Axel leapt out of the SUV first, his paws crunching through the snow as he moved toward the trailer, sniffing the ground and the air. Caleb followed quickly, his eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. The trailer was a ghost of what it once was, its paint chipped and faded, the roof sagging under the weight of neglect. But what struck Caleb most was the silence. There was no sound of movement, no voices, nothing but the wind swirling the snow around them. "Axel, stay close," Caleb whispered, giving the dog a brief command. Axel moved with precision, his body close to Caleb as they approached the door of the trailer. Caleb crouched beside the door, his breath clouding in the cold air, and gently pushed it open. The door creaked as it swung wide, revealing a dark, cold interior. The air smelled stale, tinged with the faint odor of old whiskey and something more metallic. Inside, Caleb's flashlight beam swept across the room, catching fragments of a life once lived. A broken chair, overturned furniture, and scattered debris. But his eyes quickly found what he was looking for. In the center of the small living room, lying motionless on the floor near a shattered dresser, was Maya. Her dark brown hair was matted with dried blood, her face bruised and pale, almost lifeless. The once strong woman who had worked at the garage now lying in a pool of her own blood. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He rushed to her side, kneeling beside her and checking her pulse. It was faint, but steady. "No," Noah whispered from behind him, his voice thick with fear. "Mama, Mama." Caleb placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, trying to keep him calm. "She's still breathing, Noah. She's not gone. We need to get her help now." Axel, ever the protector, remained by their side, his eyes darting between Caleb and the surroundings. He sniffed the air, his ears back alert to any danger. Caleb knew Axel would protect them no matter what. "Stay with her, Axel," Caleb commanded softly. The dog nudged Maya gently with his nose, as if offering a silent reassurance. Caleb carefully checked Maya's injuries, noting the bruises on her ribs and the deep cut on her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, but it was steady. She had been beaten badly, but Caleb was sure she wasn't beyond help, not yet. Noah stood at Caleb's side, his eyes wide with terror, but there was also a flicker of hope. Caleb knew they had to act fast. He had to get Maya to the medical outpost before it was too late. "Okay, Noah," Caleb said, his voice calm but urgent. "I'm going to lift her. Stay close and keep Axel with you. We need to get her to the car, and then we'll call for help." With Axel watching closely, Caleb gently lifted Maya into his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. She was light, almost weightless, but her limp body sent a chill through Caleb's chest. "We're going to get you out of here, Maya," he muttered under his breath, carrying her back toward the SUV. Axel followed at his heels, his tail low, but his movement steady. Caleb's mind raced, every instinct screaming that they needed to get to the medical outpost before the storm swallowed them whole. The night was far from over and the danger was still out there, but Caleb knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let anything happen to Maya or Noah. They had made it this far, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The snow was falling harder now, the swirling winds masking the faint sound of tires crunching over ice as Caleb drove the SUV back toward the main road. Maya was lying in the back seat, her face pale against the seat, her breathing shallow but steady. Axel was in the front, his head turned constantly, watching Caleb in the rearview mirror, sensing the weight of the moment. Noah was quiet, his small body curled up in the corner, still clutching the photograph of his mother as though it was the last connection he had to the world before everything changed. The storm had swallowed Frost Hollow whole, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger hiding beneath the surface, something far more dangerous than just a troubled relationship. He could feel it gnawing at him, and Travis Holt was at the center of it all. But Holt wasn't just a violent man. No, Caleb knew there was something more, something darker that needed to be uncovered. As Caleb pulled up to the trailer park, he glanced at the dim lights of the town in the distance. They were still far from the safety of the medical outpost, and his gut told him that Travis Holt wasn't done yet. Holt's name, the flicker of it from Noah's words, had sent a chill down Caleb's spine. This wasn't just about abuse. There was something criminal here, something far-reaching that had taken hold of the town. "Stay in the car, Noah," Caleb said softly. "Axel and I will be right back." Axel shifted in the front seat, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings as Caleb opened the door and stepped out into the cold, biting wind. The trailer park was as silent as it had been earlier, but now Caleb knew it was hiding something. There were no sounds of life, no lights on in the nearby trailers, no voices or movement. It felt abandoned, as if the world had given up on it. Axel's sharp senses were on full alert as he trotted alongside Caleb. The dog moved through the snow with ease, sniffing the ground, his eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. Caleb's mind was focused on one thing: finding evidence of Holt's connection to all of this. Inside the trailer, Caleb's flashlight flickered against the dark walls, casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper and cracked furniture. The air smelled stale, like something had been left to rot for far too long. Caleb's eyes scanned the room quickly, noting the overturned chairs and broken furniture, remnants of a violent struggle. There on the floor, Caleb spotted a bottle of whiskey half full lying near a smashed table leg. The label was barely visible, but Caleb could see the distinctive mark of Holt's Reserve, the name almost glowing in the flashlight's beam. It was the same brand Noah had mentioned when talking about his mother's abuser. Caleb's heart raced. This wasn't just a random fight. This was something far more calculated. Holt had been involved in more than just personal violence. This was deeper, more systemic. Axel moved past him, sniffing at the edges of the trailer. Caleb crouched down, scanning the floor for any other signs, anything that could lead him to what had really happened. There were more clues. Discarded cigarettes, matches scattered around the room, some torn scraps of paper that looked like receipts. He picked one up, his fingers running over the faded ink. It was a receipt from a local gas station dated just days ago, the name Travis Holt printed at the top. "This is it," Caleb muttered to himself. The pieces were falling into place, and they weren't just pointing at an abusive boyfriend. They were pointing toward a larger, more dangerous operation. Holt wasn't just some local thug. He was part of something bigger, something criminal. Caleb took a moment to piece the information together in his mind. The receipts, the whiskey, the broken furniture. It all pointed to Holt being involved in something far more sinister than just domestic violence. The networks that kept men like Holt protected were deep, spanning the town and beyond. And Caleb knew that finding him was only the beginning of uncovering the full extent of what had been going on in Frost Hollow. Axel returned to Caleb's side, his low growl a reminder that danger still loomed. Caleb slipped the receipt into his jacket pocket and straightened up. He needed to get back to the car, back to Noah and Maya. But he couldn't leave without more answers. As Caleb stepped back toward the door, his heart sank. He had what he needed for now, but something told him that the real fight wasn't over yet. Travis Holt wasn't just hiding behind a closed door. He was hiding behind an entire network of corruption, and Caleb knew it wouldn't be easy to expose it. Caleb's mind was still reeling from the discovery in the trailer. The receipt, the whiskey bottle, the scattered pieces of evidence, all of it pointed directly at Travis Holt. But it wasn't just the abuse that worried Caleb anymore. The clues were leading to something much bigger, something far more dangerous than he had imagined. Holt wasn't just a local thug with a temper. He was part of a criminal network, and that network was running deeper than anyone in Frost Hollow had realized. As Caleb turned to head back to the SUV, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He needed to get Maya and Noah to safety, but his instincts told him that Holt was about to make his move. Caleb had spent enough time in law enforcement to know how criminals like Holt operated. They didn't go down without a fight, and they didn't leave loose ends. Axel, ever vigilant, padded quietly behind Caleb, his head low and his ears alert. The dog's instincts were sharper than ever, and Caleb trusted him with his life. They had worked together through countless dangerous situations, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about saving Maya. It was about stopping a larger operation, one that could bring more harm to the entire town if left unchecked. Caleb reached the SUV, but as he opened the door, a familiar, unsettling feeling swept over him. Something was wrong. He didn't know what it was, but his gut told him that Holt wasn't just hiding. He was planning something. The storm was still raging outside, but the silence in the car felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Noah was quiet in the back seat, his eyes wide and tired. Maya, though still unconscious, seemed to be resting more comfortably, the steady rise and fall of her chest a small relief to Caleb. But even as he glanced at her, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Then it hit him. The fear in Noah's eyes, the urgency in his voice. It was all real. Holt knew that Maya and Noah had gotten in touch with the authorities, and Caleb realized with a sinking feeling that Holt wasn't going to sit idle while his empire was being threatened. As if on cue, the sound of an engine in the distance broke through the howling wind. Caleb's hand instinctively moved to the radio, but before he could reach it, Axel's growl filled the air, low and menacing. The dog's eyes were fixed on something in the distance, his body tense and coiled like a spring. "Stay down, Noah!" Caleb whispered urgently, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape. The headlights of a vehicle flickered through the falling snow, cutting through the dark like a knife. A moment later, the headlights grew brighter, and Caleb realized the worst Holt was back. The truck skidded to a halt at the edge of the trailer park just a few hundred yards from where Caleb and Axel stood. Caleb could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat, his figure outlined by the glow of the truck's headlights. Holt was here, and he was not alone. Caleb's heart raced. He had no way of knowing how many men Holt had with him, but he knew they were dangerous. The stakes had just been raised. Holt wasn't just here to scare them off. He was here to eliminate any evidence, any loose ends that could lead back to him. The storm outside seemed to amplify the tension, the wind howling like an omen as Caleb made his decision. He needed to act fast. He couldn't afford to wait for backup. Holt was closing in, and every second counted. "Axel, stay with Noah." Caleb muttered, his voice steady despite the rising adrenaline in his chest. Axel whined low in his throat, but Caleb could see the understanding in the dog's eyes. The German Shepherd knew what was at stake. With one final glance at the SUV, Caleb slipped out into the snow, moving as quietly as he could through the drifting white powder. He had to find out what Holt was up to, and more importantly, stop him before he could do any more damage. The snow was falling heavily now, the wind cutting through the trees and swirling the cold into every corner of the trailer park. Caleb's boots sank deep into the snow as he moved cautiously, his breath fogging in front of him, the darkness of the night blending with the whiteness of the storm. His senses were heightened, his heart pounding in his chest, as his eyes stayed trained on the truck, which was now parked just a few yards away. Axel trotted silently beside him, his fur bristling in the cold eyes, sharp ears flicking at every sound in the storm. Caleb knew Axel could sense the danger just as he did. They had faced worse situations together, years of military service, countless late-night patrols, but this felt different. This wasn't just a random confrontation. This was about survival for both him and for Maya. The truck's headlights illuminated the area briefly before they flickered off, plunging everything back into darkness. Caleb crouched low, staying hidden behind a cluster of snow-covered trees, watching intently. The sound of boots crunching in the snow reached his ears, and Caleb's muscles tensed, his hand instinctively going to the grip of his gun. The crunching stopped suddenly, and Caleb knew they weren't alone anymore. Holt and his men were out there somewhere. A low growl broke the silence. Axel, positioned beside Caleb, had his ears back and his nose raised high, sniffing the air for any trace of movement. The dog's presence was a constant reassurance, but Caleb knew the danger was closer than ever. The unmistakable voice of Travis Holt cut through the howling wind. "You think you're smart?" Rowan Holt's voice echoed from behind the truck, sharp and full of venom. "You think you can just poke around in my business and walk away?" Caleb's hand tightened on the gun. Holt had been in the shadows long enough, and it was time to bring him into the light. The man was dangerous, no question about it. His criminal activities weren't just limited to domestic violence. He was the key to a network that spanned far beyond Frost Hollow, smuggling, illegal trade, and a string of abuses. Holt had his fingers in many dark pies, and Caleb knew that exposing him could bring down not just the man, but the entire system he had helped build. "You're not walking away from this, Holt," Caleb called out, his voice steady but his words carrying the weight of the truth. "It's over for you. You're going to pay for what you've done." The storm roared louder, but Caleb wasn't sure if it was the wind or Holt's men that were closing in. Axel's growl deepened, his body tensing as he moved to the edge of Caleb's reach. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Then Holt's voice came again, low but mocking. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Rowan? You're a fool. You don't know who you're up against." Suddenly, two figures emerged from the shadows, men Caleb didn't recognize but whose presence sent a chill down his spine. They were tall, wearing dark jackets, and they moved with the predatory grace of men used to violence. Holt's back up. Caleb's instinct screamed at him to move, but he was outnumbered. He had to think fast. The air was thick with tension, and Caleb knew this wasn't going to be easy. His fingers tightened around the gun as he slowly took aim, keeping Axel close by his side. The dog's growl escalated the sound, sending a clear message he was ready. Without warning, one of Holt's men lunged forward, drawing a weapon from his jacket. Caleb fired first, his shot ringing out across the trailer park, the crack of the gunshot breaking the silence of the storm. The man dropped, falling to the ground, but it wasn't over. Holt's other man pulled out his own weapon, aiming straight for Caleb. Axel sprang forward without hesitation, a blur of motion slamming into the attacker's legs and knocking him off balance. Caleb seized the opportunity, firing once more. The man crumpled to the ground, his weapon slipping from his hand. Holt's laughter rang out in the distance, cold and mocking. "You think you've won? You think you can stop this?" Caleb's eyes burned with determination. He wasn't done yet. "This isn't over, Holt. You're not getting away with it." Holt's shadowy figure disappeared behind the trees, and Caleb knew it wouldn't be long before he ran again. The man was a coward, but dangerous nonetheless. Caleb had no intention of letting him slip away. This time, Holt wouldn't be able to hide. Axel stood next to Caleb, panting but alert. Caleb gave the dog a quick nod. They'd won this round, but the real fight was still ahead. Holt was still out there, and Caleb was determined to find him before he could hurt anyone else. The snowstorm raged around them, but inside the SUV it felt like the world had come to a standstill. Caleb's heart was still pounding in his chest as he slammed the door shut, his hand quickly checking the rearview mirror to ensure no one had followed them. Maya was still unconscious in the back seat, her breathing shallow but steady. Noah, shaken and pale, sat next to her, clutching the photograph of his mother with trembling hands. Axel sat quietly beside Caleb in the front seat, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror, scanning the road behind them with an alertness only a trained canine could have. The German Shepherd's presence was a constant source of comfort to Caleb. Axel's loyalty and instincts had saved them more times than Caleb could count, and tonight he was as much a protector as he had ever been. Caleb knew this wasn't over. Holt was still out there, and they had barely escaped his clutches. Holt's threats rang in Caleb's mind like a dark echo. The man was dangerous, far more than just a violent abuser. Caleb's thoughts flicked back to the evidence he had uncovered in the trailer. The receipts, the whiskey bottles, the hidden connections. Holt was tangled in a much larger web than just domestic violence, and Caleb knew it. Holt wouldn't stop until he was sure Maya and Noah were silenced for good. But that wasn't going to happen, not if Caleb could help it. Axel's growl interrupted Caleb's thoughts as the dog's nose twitched, sensing something on the wind. Caleb's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to focus. The snow was thickening again, the storm making the road ahead harder to see. They needed to get to safety to the medical outpost before it was too late. Caleb muttered to himself, glancing at the rearview mirror where he could see Noah's worried face. "Hang on just a little longer." Noah's voice broke the silence. "Is she going to be okay? I don't want to lose her." Caleb's heart tightened at the boy's words, but he pushed the emotion aside. He needed to stay focused. "We're getting her the help she needs, Noah. We're almost there." Noah nodded, but Caleb could see the fear still in the boy's eyes. It was the same fear Caleb had seen in countless faces over the years. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing someone they loved. But Caleb couldn't afford to get lost in that fear. He had a mission to complete. Maya and Noah needed him now more than ever. The wind howled outside the storm, growing fiercer as they made their way through the dense woods. Caleb knew the road to the medical outpost was treacherous, especially in weather like this. He had driven it countless times, but tonight the snow was coming down harder than ever, making it feel like they were driving through a ghostly world of white. Axel remained as alert as ever, his eyes darting from the road ahead to the rearview mirror. Caleb could feel the dog's tension, his body language signaling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the storm. It was the sense that they were being hunted, that something or someone was out there waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Stay close, Axel," Caleb murmured, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The dog gave a low whine in response, his eyes focused on Caleb. It was as if Axel understood the weight of the moment, as if he knew they weren't just running from danger. They were running toward something more. They were running toward justice. The snow continued to fall in thick sheets, the world outside growing darker and more desolate with every mile. Caleb glanced at the clock. He was cutting it close. The medical outpost was still miles away, and they had to get there before Maya's condition worsened. He pressed down harder on the accelerator, the SUV cutting through the snow as best as it could. Axel's ears perked up, and Caleb could feel his dog's restlessness. He knew what that meant. They were close. "Hold on, Maya," Caleb whispered, glancing at the unconscious woman in the back seat. "We're almost there." The SUV's tires crunched against the snow, the engine groaning as Caleb pushed forward, desperate to get to the medical outpost. He glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror. Her face still pale, her body limp against the seat. The tension in Caleb's chest tightened with every passing mile. He had no idea how much time they had before her condition worsened. Holt's attack had been brutal, and Maya's life was hanging by a thread. Axel, as always, was on high alert. His ears flicked back and forth, his eyes never leaving the road. Caleb knew Axel had an uncanny ability to sense danger, and it was evident that something still didn't sit right with the dog. The storm outside was getting worse, but the feeling of impending danger Caleb had felt from the start hadn't gone away. As the medical outpost grew closer, Caleb's thoughts began to shift. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered in Holt's trailer. The receipt, the whiskey bottles, the broken furniture, all of it pointed to something larger than a simple case of domestic violence. Holt's connections ran deep, and Caleb had a sinking feeling that he was only scratching the surface. The moment they reached the outpost, Caleb pulled into the parking lot and quickly ran to the back of the SUV to get Maya out. Axel remained by his side, ever faithful, but Caleb couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their work wasn't done. This wasn't just about saving Maya. It was about uncovering the truth behind Holt and the criminal web he was a part of. And for that, Caleb needed answers. After Maya was handed over to the medical staff, Caleb's focus shifted once again. His mind raced back to the trailer. There had to be more clues, more evidence of Holt's involvement in something much larger. He couldn't waste any time. Caleb turned and headed straight back to the trailer. The wind howled in the distance, but he paid it no mind. He knew there were still too many unanswered questions. Returning to the site felt different now. The quiet was oppressive, and the snow had settled in thick drifts around the abandoned trailers. Caleb moved quickly but methodically, searching the area for anything that might lead him to more information. As he approached the trailer where Maya had been found, his flashlight caught something partially hidden under the floorboards, just enough for Caleb to see a corner of a small notebook sticking out. His heart skipped a beat. He crouched low, carefully prying it free. The pages were filled with hurried, scribbled notes, names, dates, locations. The more he flipped through, the more his suspicions grew. This wasn't just a log of transactions, it was a detailed record of smuggling routes, payments, and meetings. Holt's criminal empire laid out in black and white. Caleb's eyes darted over the names, recognizing some from the local area, while others were tied to larger criminal organizations that operated outside of Frost Hollow. As he scanned the pages, Caleb felt a rising sense of urgency. Holt wasn't just an isolated criminal. He was a cog in a much larger machine. And that machine extended far beyond the town's borders. Caleb's mind was spinning with the implications. Holt had been running illegal shipments right under the town's nose. The whiskey bottles, the shady meetings, the connections to larger criminal networks, it was all starting to make sense. Holt was involved in something much bigger than a simple local thug. He was connected to a web of crime that reached farther than anyone could have imagined. The more Caleb thought about it, the more he realized the danger that lay ahead. Holt wasn't just a violent man. He was a dangerous player in a criminal network that Caleb had to expose. And to do that, Caleb needed more information, more answers. He slipped the notebook into his jacket, and as he stood up, Axel padded over to him, his ears raised in alert. Caleb didn't need to hear the growl, but he could feel it. There was more danger ahead. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He couldn't do this alone. It was time to bring in reinforcements. The storm was relentless, but Caleb had no time to waste. Holt's network was bigger than he had anticipated, and the notebook he had found was the first real evidence he had of the scale of the operation. The weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. He needed backup. More than that, he needed a team that could help him expose this criminal network and bring Holt down. Caleb slipped the notebook deeper into his jacket, his hands tense as he retrieved his radio from his belt. The crackle of static broke the silence of the night, and Caleb quickly adjusted the frequency to contact his colleagues back at the sheriff's station. Rowan to Sheriff Dana Whitmore, he said, his voice low but urgent. "I need help. It's worse than we thought. I've got proof that Holt's involved in something much bigger, a criminal network that's been operating right under our noses." There was a brief pause on the other end before Dana's voice came through, calm but steady. "What do you need, Caleb? I need you to get the team together," Caleb replied, glancing over at Axel, who stood by his side, his gaze steady and alert. "We're going to need all hands on deck to track down Holt and his associates. This isn't just a domestic violence case anymore. It's part of a larger smuggling and trafficking ring. I need everyone who's available, and I need it fast." "I'll get the deputies together," Dana confirmed. "We'll meet you at the station in 20 minutes. "Don't go after him alone, Rowan." "I won't," Caleb said, his voice resolute, "but I'm going to need to move quickly. Holt won't be easy to catch." With the radio silence broken, Caleb took a deep breath, the urgency of the situation growing with every passing second. Holt was dangerous, and now that Caleb had a glimpse into his criminal connections, the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about finding Holt. It was about dismantling a larger operation that could put the entire town at risk. Axel stood beside Caleb, his golden eyes fixed on his handler with an intensity that Caleb knew all too well. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. Axel was more than just a dog. He was Caleb's partner, and together they had faced countless dangers. But this time, Caleb knew the fight ahead of them was unlike any they had encountered before. Caleb opened the door to the SUV, the wind cutting through the small opening, but Axel was already at his side, ready for whatever came next. They had both seen enough danger to understand that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Holt had been running his operation for far too long, and Caleb knew that bringing him to justice wouldn't be as simple as just arresting him. The investigation had already become more complicated. There were more people involved, people with power and influence, and Caleb couldn't do this alone. He needed a team. He needed every resource at his disposal. The network Holt was a part of extended far beyond Frost Hollow, and Caleb wasn't sure who could be trusted anymore, but he knew one thing for certain: the town was depending on him, and he couldn't back down now. As Caleb turned to head back to the sheriff's station, Axel followed without hesitation, staying close to his side. The storm raged on, but Caleb's resolve only strengthened. Holt might have had the upper hand for now, but Caleb wasn't about to let him get away with it. The wind howled as Caleb and Axel made their way back to the sheriff's station. Snowflakes stung Caleb's face, but he hardly noticed the cold. His mind was occupied with the discoveries he had just uncovered about Travis Holt. Holt was no longer just a local thug. He was part of a much larger, more dangerous operation. The notebook Caleb had found was a glimpse into a web of criminal activity that spanned well beyond Frost Hollow, extending into neighboring counties and possibly even farther. Caleb's chest tightened as he thought about the network behind Holt. Smuggling, illegal alcohol distribution, and various other crimes that had slipped through the cracks of law enforcement for years. Holt was merely the face of a much deeper, more insidious organization. As Caleb reached the sheriff's station, he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm outside was only a reflection of the storm brewing inside. The real danger was just beginning to unfold. Inside the station, Caleb found Sheriff Dana Whitmore already gathered with a few of her deputies, the room buzzing with quiet urgency. He quickly briefed them on the findings, showing them the notebook with all the detailed notes on illegal shipments, names of people involved, and locations of secret meetings. As he spoke, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just a case of domestic abuse anymore. It was a full-scale criminal network, and Caleb had stumbled into the middle of it. The thing is, Caleb continued, his voice steady but tinged with frustration, Holt's just the beginning. These people are far bigger than him. They have connections everywhere, and they're not going to let us take him down easily. Dana nodded grimly, her sharp eyes scanning the notes. We knew Holt was trouble, but this... She paused as if the magnitude of the situation was just starting to sink in. If this is what we think it is, we're dealing with something much more dangerous. We're not just fighting one man, we're fighting an entire system that's been operating under our noses. Caleb nodded, but the weight on his shoulders only grew heavier. He could feel the tension building, the pressure mounting. There were powerful people behind Holt, people with the influence and resources to make this investigation disappear before it even got off the ground. And those were the people Caleb feared most. They had the power to make this all vanish, to keep Holt protected no matter what. We need to move carefully, Caleb said, glancing at Axel, who stood at his side, sensing the danger in the air. The German shepherd's eyes were sharp, his body still and alert. Holt won't go down without a fight, but we also have to worry about the people backing him. There's more going on here than we know. The conversation in the room turned to strategy, but Caleb's mind was elsewhere. Every instinct told him that someone somewhere was going to try to stop them. Holt had too many connections, too many allies. People with power who would protect their own interests at any cost. A sudden thought crossed Caleb's mind, a chilling realization. Holt was connected to people within law enforcement, people who had helped him evade justice for so long. That betrayal ran deeper than Caleb had ever expected, and it made him question everyone around him. Who could he trust? Who was on his side? As the group discussed next steps, Caleb stood back, lost in thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but they were part of a much larger puzzle, one that Caleb wasn't sure he was prepared to solve. The danger was escalating, and the pressure was mounting. But Caleb had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. As he looked around the room, Caleb's thoughts turned to the people who had enabled Holt's operation, the ones who had turned a blind eye to the abuse and corruption. They were the real enemies now. It wasn't just about stopping Holt. It was about exposing the entire network that had allowed him to thrive in the shadows. Caleb's mind raced as he processed the weight of what they had uncovered so far. The walls of the sheriff's station seemed to close in around him, the once familiar room now filled with a tension that felt suffocating. Holt's operation was not just a small-time criminal ring. It was a complex, insidious web of corruption that stretched far beyond Frost Hollow. The more Caleb thought about the notes, the receipts, and the connections he had discovered, the more it became clear Holt was only a piece of the puzzle. His thoughts were interrupted as Dana Whitmore, the sheriff, turned to him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Caleb's jaw tightened and he nodded, though the unease lingered in his gut. "No, Dana. It's worse than we thought." He ran a hand through his hair. "Holt is connected to people in law enforcement, but it goes beyond that. His network is much larger. We're dealing with corrupt officials, maybe even people in this room who've been turning a blind eye." Dana's eyes hardened. "Are you saying someone in this department is working with him?" Caleb paused, his mind flashing back to the conversations he had overheard, the whispers of Holt's name being linked to shady deals and the strange timing of how he always seemed to slip through the cracks. "I don't know yet, but I suspect we're not just dealing with a criminal. We're dealing with an organized operation that spans the local government, maybe even reaches international crime syndicates." Caleb paced across the room, Axel standing at his side, his body tense as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "Think about it," Caleb continued. "The alcohol smuggling, the illegal shipments, the connections to local businesses. Holt didn't do this alone. He's got people in high places, people who've helped him hide in plain sight." Dana was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Caleb could see the wheels turning in her mind. She had always been sharp, but this was something entirely different. A web of deceit that reached into the very institutions that were supposed to protect the town. "Do we have any solid proof?" Dana asked, her voice low but resolute. Caleb nodded. "The notebook. It's not just a record of transactions. It's a roadmap to everything Holt's been involved in. There are names of people who've been helping him, protecting him. Some of them are local. Others—" Caleb trailed off, his thoughts swirling. "Some of them are tied to international smuggling rings. This is bigger than just Frost Hollow. This could go all the way to the top." The revelation hit like a cold wave. The fight Caleb thought he was preparing for had just escalated into something far more dangerous than he had imagined. He wasn't just dealing with a violent abuser anymore. He was up against an organized criminal operation that was deeply entrenched in the town's fabric, and those behind Holt were willing to do anything to protect their empire. "Who else knows about this?" Dana asked, her voice steady, though Caleb could see the tension in her eyes. "Not many," Caleb replied. "Just you, me, and a few of the deputies. I don't want to bring anyone else into this until we have more concrete evidence. The fewer people who know, the safer we'll be." Dana nodded. "Okay, we'll move carefully. But we need to act fast. If this is as big as you say, we're running out of time. Holt's not going to sit idle." Caleb exhaled slowly. "We need to take Holt down, but more importantly, we need to expose the entire network. If we can dismantle this, we'll be stopping more than just him. We'll be taking down a criminal syndicate that's been operating right under our noses." Axel stood at Caleb's side, his body still and focused, as if he too understood that this was no longer just about rescuing a woman and child. It was about dismantling an empire of corruption. The storm outside raged with an intensity that matched the tension in Caleb's chest. The wind howled as the snow swirled in thick, blinding sheets, but Caleb's focus was unwavering. He stood by the window of the sheriff's station, looking out into the white blur of the night, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and urgency. Holt and his network had proven to be more elusive than he had expected, but Caleb wasn't about to let them slip away. Not this time. Axel stood beside him, his body coiled with energy, eyes scanning the parking lot through the heavy snow. The German Shepherd had been with Caleb through too many harrowing experiences to count, but tonight the air between them was different. There was a deeper understanding and unspoken knowledge that this chase was far more than a simple rescue mission. The stakes were higher. Holt's criminal operation had deep roots in the town, and Caleb wasn't going to let them fester any longer. "Sheriff Whitmore." Caleb said, his voice low but urgent. "I need backup. Holt's people are on the move, and we can't let them disappear again." Dana, ever steady in the face of danger, nodded. "I'll get the team ready." "You think they're making a run for it?" Caleb's eyes flicked over to Axel, who had begun to pace back and forth, sensing the urgency in the air. If Holt's smart, he's already making preparations to cover his tracks. He's not just running, he's trying to protect himself and his network. We need to catch him before he can get too far. The storm outside grew stronger, but Caleb's resolve was only intensifying. They had to move quickly. The criminals connected to Holt were no longer just a small group of rogue individuals. They were a well-organized, dangerous network, and Caleb wasn't going to let them get away. With a nod from Dana, Caleb turned to Axel and gave the dog a quick command. "Let's go, boy. It's time to bring them down." The SUV roared to life as Caleb and Axel headed into the storm, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the heavy snowfall. Every mile Caleb drove felt like a race against time, the pressure mounting with each passing minute. He couldn't afford to lose this trail, not when the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. Holt had made his move, and Caleb wasn't going to let him disappear again. As they approached the outskirts of Frost Hollow, Caleb's eyes narrowed. He'd been tracking the movements of Holt's associates, and it wasn't long before he picked up on something. Movement in the distance. Two dark silhouettes, their forms barely visible against the storm, darted between the trees near the old quarry. They were trying to make their escape. "There they are," Caleb muttered, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Holt's people." Axel's ears perked up, his body tense and ready for action. Caleb could see the dog's alertness, could almost feel the pulse of adrenaline running through the German Shepherd. Axel was ready, and Caleb trusted him with his life. This wasn't just about chasing criminals, it was about stopping an operation that could tear their town apart. As the SUV tore through the snow, the figures ahead grew clearer. Caleb pushed the vehicle harder, the tires screeching as they sped closer. The criminals were trying to escape, but they hadn't counted on Caleb and Axel tracking them so quickly. The chase was on. But as they drew closer, the figures in the distance suddenly scattered, running in different directions, creating confusion. Caleb cursed under his breath. "They're splitting up." Axel's growl rumbled deep in his chest. The dog was ready to take on whoever came his way. Caleb's mind raced. He had to decide who to follow, who to stop, and how to get the evidence they needed. Just then, a sharp sound rang out in the distance, followed by the faint crack of gunfire. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a chase anymore, they were armed. The danger had escalated in an instant. Caleb's instincts kicked in, and he veered the SUV toward one of the figures running ahead. Axel leapt into action, his paws kicking up the snow as he sprinted alongside Caleb, eyes locked on their target. The snow whipped around them as Caleb and Axel tore through the darkness. The figures ahead of them had scattered, each of them disappearing into the white wilderness, but Caleb's focus remained on one man, Travis Holt. The crack of gunfire had sent a shockwave through his chest, and now, with the SUV speeding through the storm, Caleb knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. This wasn't just another chase, it was the final showdown. Holt had nowhere left to hide. Axel's sharp eyes were fixed on their target. His muscles coiled, ready to spring into action. Caleb's pulse raced, his hand gripping the steering wheel tighter. Holt had been running his operation under the radar for far too long, but tonight it would all come to an end. Caleb wasn't going to let him slip away again. The SUV skidded to a halt just ahead of a clearing, the headlights illuminating a lone figure standing in the distance. Holt. He was crouched low, his hand gripping a gun, his eyes cold and calculating as he turned to face Caleb. Caleb Rowan Holt sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long." Caleb's hand hovered near the door, his eyes never leaving Holt's face. He could see the tension in the man's stance, the way his fingers tightened around the grip of the gun. Holt was ready to fight, but Caleb had no intention of backing down. "You've run for long enough," Caleb said, his voice steady, though adrenaline pulsed through his veins. "This ends tonight. You're not getting away." Holt's eyes narrowed, a dark smile crossing his face. "You really think you can stop me? I've got people everywhere, Caleb. You think you're the first to try and bring me down? I've been untouchable for years. And now you're just another pawn in my game." Caleb's heart beat louder in his chest. Holt wasn't just a thug, he was a man who had infiltrated every level of the system, from the local government to organized crime syndicates. And now, in the middle of the storm, in the heart of this desolate place, Holt was finally cornered. But Caleb knew this wasn't going to be easy. He could feel the weight of the moment. "You've hurt enough people, Holt," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "And you're not going to get away with it. I'm taking you down." For a moment, Holt said nothing. Then, with a quick, fluid motion, he raised the gun, aiming it directly at Caleb. Axel's growl echoed through the night, a deep warning that sent a ripple of tension through the air. But Caleb didn't flinch. He was prepared for this moment. He had to be. "Put it down." "Holt!" Caleb commanded, his voice unwavering. "It's over." But Holt just laughed, a low, bitter chuckle. "You don't get it, do you, Caleb? This isn't just about me. It's bigger than you, bigger than Frost Hollow. You think I'm the only one involved in this mess? The people I work for? They don't take kindly to failures." Before Caleb could react, Axel sprang forward, his body moving like lightning. Holt's eyes widened in shock, but he didn't lower the gun fast enough. Axel leapt, knocking the weapon from Holt's hand with a vicious growl. Holt stumbled backward, his eyes wide with panic, but Axel was already there, his teeth bared, ready to finish what Caleb had started. Caleb shouted, rushing forward to grab the dog's collar, pulling him back. "Stay with me!" Holt scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You're making a big mistake, Rowan," he spat. "You think you've won. You haven't seen the full picture. The people behind me, they'll make sure you pay for this." Caleb's eyes narrowed as he stood over Holt, his grip firm on his gun. "It's over, Holt. You're not going anywhere. You're done." As Holt glared at him, Caleb could see the man's desperation. His whole facade was crumbling. He had been hiding behind a network of corruption for so long that the idea of being caught was unbearable to him. Axel, ever loyal, stood beside Caleb, his body still tense, but he watched Caleb with complete trust. The dog's loyalty was absolute. Even in the face of danger, Axel never once wavered. "You're going to face justice for everything you've done," Caleb said, his voice cold but resolute. "This is where it ends." Holt's face twisted in defeat, but his lips curled into a final bitter sneer. "You think you've beaten me? You're just the beginning of the fall. When this is over, the real war will start." Caleb stepped forward, grabbing Holt's arm and cuffing him. "Let's get you to the station. The only thing you'll be fighting now is your sentence." The drive back to the sheriff's station was quiet, the only sound being the low hum of the SUV's engine and the soft whine of Axel, who sat in the back, his eyes never leaving Holt. Caleb's mind, however, was racing. Holt was finally in custody. The man who had caused so much pain, terror, and destruction was now being brought to justice. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking just beyond his reach. There was more to this case, more to Holt's criminal network that hadn't been revealed yet. Something wasn't right. Holt sat slumped in the back seat, handcuffed and silent. His earlier defiance had vanished, replaced with a sullen bitterness. He didn't speak as Caleb drove, but the tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just Holt's defeat that Caleb could feel, it was the growing realization that this victory, while important, was incomplete. As they neared the station, Holt suddenly broke the silence. His voice was low but laced with venom, the words dripping with disdain. "You think you've won, Rowan. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game. You have no idea who you're really up against." Caleb's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the wheel. "What are you talking about, Holt?" Holt let out a bitter laugh, his head leaning back against the seat. "You think I've been working alone all this time, that I've been hiding out here in this hellhole making deals with the locals? You're smarter than that, Rowan. I'm just a small piece of the puzzle." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" Holt's lips curled into a smile, but there was nothing triumphant about it. "The people who've helped me, people you trust, are the ones who've kept me safe. You want names? Fine. Sheriff Whitmore, your own superior, is on the take, and so is half the town council. They've been covering up my operation for years, making sure the money keeps flowing. I've had help every step of the way." Caleb's stomach dropped. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had trusted Dana, trusted his colleagues in the sheriff's department. The idea that someone close to him could be involved in this dark web of corruption was almost too much to bear. "No," Caleb muttered, disbelief washing over him. "You're lying." Holt's eyes glinted with malicious pleasure. "You've been playing their game all along, Rowan. You just didn't know it. They're all in on it. The deals, the smuggling routes, the bribes. It's a business, and it's been running smoothly for years. I'm just the guy who made sure it didn't fall apart. But don't worry. When this is all over, I won't be the only one taking the fall." The implications of Holt's words hit Caleb like a wave. The sheriff, Dana, the person he had trusted and worked alongside for so long, was implicated in this. His mind raced, trying to process everything. This wasn't just a case of domestic abuse anymore. Holt's operation was embedded in the very fabric of Frost Hollow, with powerful people protecting him and his network. As Caleb drove, his thoughts turned dark. The betrayal cut deeper than he had expected. Dana had been his ally, his mentor. How could she be involved in something like this? How many others in the town had turned a blind eye to the crimes happening right under their noses? The sense of betrayal felt like a weight in his chest, something he couldn't shake. By the time they reached the sheriff's station, Caleb's mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and disbelief. Holt's words echoed in his ears, and a new, heavier truth was sinking in. The fight against Holt was only the beginning. The real battle would be exposing the corruption that had been allowed to fester in Frost Hollow for so long. The dim light of the early morning filtered through the blinds of the small medical room, casting soft shadows across the floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world coated in fresh snow, the stillness of the town broken only by the distant hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights. It was in this quiet that Maya began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment everything was blurry. The room, the faces around her, the soft beeping of the machines. But then her vision cleared, and she saw him. Noah sitting beside her, his head resting gently on her arm. His small hand was curled around hers, and he looked up at her with wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear, relief, and a quiet joy that only a child who had feared losing a loved one could express. Mama Noah whispered, his voice trembling as he sat up. Maya blinked, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes locked onto her son's face. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of relief through her. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this simple connection. The feel of his small hand in hers, the comfort of seeing him safe. She had feared that this moment might never come, that she might never get the chance to hold him again. Her voice was hoarse as she spoke, barely a whisper. "Noah, you're okay? You're really here?" Noah nodded, tears brimming in his eyes as he smiled through his relief. "I'm okay, Mama. You're awake. You're going to be okay." Maya reached for him, pulling him into a gentle embrace, the pain in her ribs forgotten for just a moment. She had made it. They had both made it. She felt a surge of gratitude that overwhelmed her chest, but it wasn't just for her own survival. It was for the man and the dog who had saved her. Caleb and Axel had brought them here, had kept them alive when everything else seemed hopeless. "Maya," a voice said softly from the door. Caleb stood in the doorway, his uniform rumpled, his face weary but resolute. Axel was at his side, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes full of quiet understanding. Caleb stepped forward, giving Maya a nod of reassurance. "Caleb," Maya whispered, her voice cracking as she tried to sit up. "You saved us. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb shook his head, his voice calm. "You don't have to thank me. It's Axel who deserves your thanks." Maya turned her gaze toward the dog, and in that moment she understood. Axel had been her protector as much as Caleb had. He had stayed by her side, ever loyal, never faltering, even when the world around them seemed to fall apart. The bond between them wasn't just that of a dog and his handler. It was the bond of survival, of love, of loyalty. And in the darkest of times, it was Axel's presence that had given her hope. Maya reached out her hand, trembling as she stroked Axel's fur. "Thank you, Axel. You're our hero." Axel leaned into her touch, his eyes softening, and for a moment Maya saw not just the trained, fierce protector, but a creature who had given everything for her and Noah's safety. He had kept them alive when no one else could have. Caleb watched them for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on him. There were still so many unknowns, so many secrets to uncover, but in that room with Axel standing at their side and Noah's small hand clutching his mother's, Caleb found a glimmer of hope. This fight wasn't just about exposing the criminals who had been hiding in plain sight for years. It was about ensuring that people like Maya, people like Noah, could live their lives without fear. It was about the small moments of redemption like this one that made it all worthwhile. Maya looked up at Caleb, her eyes filled with gratitude. "How can we ever repay you?" "You don't need to," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Just keep your family safe. That's all that matters now." Axel stood proudly beside Caleb, a symbol of everything they had fought for: their survival, their redemption, and their future. The days following Holt's capture and the unraveling of his criminal network were some of the most transformative in Frost Hollow's history. The once sleepy town, hidden beneath layers of snow and silence, was now awakening, no longer shrouded by the dark veil of corruption that had plagued it for years. Caleb and Axel's roles in the downfall of Holt's empire were well known. Their bravery had become the talk of the town, and while Caleb might have preferred to keep a low profile, it was impossible to ignore the gratitude the town felt toward him. People who had once whispered about the crimes in the shadows now approached him with smiles, with thanks, and sometimes even with tears in their eyes. They had been living in fear for too long, and now, thanks to Caleb and Axel, the fear was lifting, replaced by a cautious but powerful sense of hope. Caleb didn't feel like a hero. He never had. He was a man doing his job, following his instincts and protecting the people he cared about. But as he walked through the streets of Frost Hollow, his mind couldn't help but acknowledge the change in the air. There was something different, something that had been missing for a long time. Axel, ever by his side, became a symbol of that change. The German shepherd's fierce loyalty, his unwavering courage, and his ability to protect not just Caleb but an entire community made him a beloved figure. People would stop Caleb in the streets to pet Axel, to tell him their stories, to express their gratitude. Axel had done more than save Maya and Noah. He had restored a sense of security to the entire town. It wasn't just Caleb's bravery that people remembered. It was Axel's, too. The bond between man and dog had become a story of hope and redemption that would be passed down through generations. With Holt and his associates finally behind bars, the town began to heal. The local authorities, now under new leadership and with more honest officers, started to address the corruption that had been allowed to flourish for so long. Investigations into other members of the criminal network were underway, and the truth was finally coming to light. People who had been complicit in Holt's operations were being held accountable, and the town could begin to rebuild, not just physically but morally. The changes weren't immediate. There were those who resented the disruption, the shifting of power, but the majority of Frost Hollow's residents were ready for the change. They had lived in fear for so long that they didn't know how to live without it. But Caleb's actions and Axel's loyalty had shown them that it was possible to rebuild trust, to restore a sense of justice. Caleb and Axel became figures of inspiration. Caleb, the man who had fought against impossible odds to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Axel, the dog who had never wavered, who had stood as a beacon of loyalty and courage when the world around them seemed darkest. It wasn't just about justice being served. It was about hope being restored. For the first time in years, Frost Hollow was starting to feel like home again, a place where people didn't have to live in fear, where the law worked for them, not against them. As the days turned into weeks, Caleb couldn't help but notice the shift in the town's energy. The town square, once eerily quiet, now saw people gathering, talking, and planning for the future. The small businesses that had been struggling under the weight of the corruption were starting to thrive again, and the community was coming together in ways it never had before. But even with all the positive change, Caleb knew the fight wasn't truly over. Holt's network had been exposed, but there were still pieces to the puzzle that needed to be uncovered, and there was always the lingering fear that others somewhere in the shadows might still be working to restore what had been lost. But for now, Frost Hollow was healing, and Caleb, with Axel at his side, could take a breath, if only for a moment. The town of Frost Hollow had begun to look a little brighter with each passing day. The weight of years filled with fear, lies, and corruption was slowly lifting, replaced by the sweet air of hope and renewal. In the center of it all, Maya had found a way to heal, not just herself, but the community as well. She had opened a small cafe on the corner of the town square, a place where people gathered to share stories, sip coffee, and find solace in the simple comforts of life. Axel, of course, was always by her side. The cafe was cozy and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, bleak days that had defined Frost Hollow for so long. The walls were lined with soft, inviting colors, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, making the space feel like home. People who had once been divided by the shadows of corruption now came together to sit, relax, and connect in a place where they could finally feel safe. And Axel was the heart of it all. The loyal German shepherd became the symbol of the town's revival, a reminder of the bond that had saved them all. Caleb often found himself stopping by Maya's cafe, the soft warmth of the space a comforting reprieve from the cold, harsh reality that still lingered in the town. His bond with Maya had deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated. They had both been through so much together, struggling, fighting, and surviving, and now as the days passed and the weight of their past struggles began to fade, they found a sense of peace. Noah, too, had found comfort in this new chapter. The little boy who had once been so filled with fear and uncertainty was now full of joy and wonder. Maya had worked hard to rebuild not only their home but their lives. She had been more than a mother. She had been a warrior, and now she was finally able to enjoy the simple pleasures of life with her son. Noah spent his days running around the cafe, his laughter ringing through the air, while Axel kept a watchful eye on him, ever the protector. For Caleb, these moments were small but significant. He had come to Frost Hollow to escape, to find peace after years of chaos and loss. But what he hadn't expected was to find a new family, one that had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing: a place to belong. He had always been a man of action, driven by duty, but now with Axel at his side and Maya and Noah by his side, Caleb found something else, a reason to stay. The quiet moments in the cafe when Maya would pour him a cup of coffee and Noah would sit on the floor playing with Axel felt like the life Caleb had been searching for. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars from the past that would take time to heal. But for the first time in years, Caleb felt at peace. He had found not just a cause but a home. Maya looked up from the counter one afternoon, a smile on her face as she watched Caleb and Axel sitting at one of the tables, the peaceful atmosphere of the cafe surrounding them. She had found her peace too, in a way she never thought possible. The bond they shared, forged in the darkest of times, had only grown stronger. "You know," she said, her voice soft as she approached Caleb, "I never thought I'd be here doing this. But it feels right. This place, this life, it's like a dream." Caleb smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "It is a dream, Maya, and we've earned it. All of us." Axel, sensing the quiet conversation, lifted his head from where he lay at Caleb's feet. His golden eyes met Caleb's, and in that moment Caleb knew Axel understood. This was their new reality, a place of peace, of hope, and of love. Together, Caleb, Maya, Noah, and Axel had created a new life for themselves. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had come through stronger, more united than ever before. And as Caleb looked around the cafe, he knew that in the end, this was what truly mattered. The years had passed quietly in Frost Hollow, and the once silent town had transformed into a place filled with hope and growth. Caleb, Maya, Axel, and Noah had become the heartbeat of the community, each of them shaping the town's future in their own way. But for Caleb, one of the most profound changes had been watching Noah grow from the scared little boy he had once been into someone who now stood tall with courage and kindness. Noah was no longer the child who had run to Caleb for help in the storm. He had blossomed into a young boy with an unshakable sense of right and wrong, shaped by the lessons Caleb and Axel had taught him. The lessons of courage, of standing up for what is just, and of the unwavering loyalty that Axel had shown him were now a part of who he was. The quiet nights spent in the cafe watching Noah play with Axel had turned into some of Caleb's most treasured moments. He remembered the boy's first nervous steps, the hesitant way he would reach out for comfort, and now he watched as Noah ran freely with Axel in the yard outside, laughing as the two German shepherds, Axel and the puppies, played in the freshly fallen snow. Axel, ever the protector, stayed close, but Noah had grown into his own, his bond with the dog now just as natural as the bond between him and Caleb. Caleb watched as Noah's laughter rang out across the yard, Axel chasing the little ones and Noah chasing Axel. It wasn't just play, it was a manifestation of everything they had overcome together. Axel had taught Noah more than just how to love a dog. He had shown him what it meant to be brave, to protect those you care about, and to remain loyal in the face of adversity. Noah had also begun to help at the cafe, learning the value of hard work and the importance of giving back to the community. He had learned, just as Caleb had, that home wasn't just where you lived, it was where you made a difference. In the mornings, he would help Maya with the chores, sweeping the floor, greeting customers, and sometimes playing with the younger dogs while Axel supervised. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Caleb sat in the back of the cafe watching Noah with a fond smile. The boy had become more than just a reminder of the pain and darkness they had fought through. He was a beacon of the future, of all that could be rebuilt when you fought for what was right. Axel, lying peacefully at Caleb's feet, raised his head to look at Noah, his eyes soft content. Caleb knew that Axel was as proud as he was of the boy's growth. Noah was no longer the frightened child who had run to him for help. He was now a young man capable of standing on his own 2 feet, and knowing that the strength to keep going even in the face of fear was something he had learned from the two most loyal companions a person could have. As Noah and the puppies ran across the yard, Axel by their side, Caleb stood up slowly and walked outside. The sky above them was painted in soft hues of orange and purple, the air crisp and clean. He watched as Noah knelt down to play with the puppies, Axel sitting proudly next to him. "Look at them," Caleb murmured, his voice filled with quiet pride. "They're growing up so fast." Maya joined him on the porch, standing beside Caleb as she watched their son. "They're the future," she said softly, "just like you and Axel were for me." Caleb smiled, his gaze still fixed on Noah. The boy had come so far. Axel, with his loyal heart, had given them both more than they could ever repay. And as Caleb stood there watching Noah play with the puppies, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The darkness they had once lived in had faded, and now what remained was hope. Hope that the next generation would carry on the lessons of love, courage, and loyalty that they had all fought so hard to keep alive. The evening settled softly over Frost Hollow, painting the small town in warm hues of orange and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that seemed for the first time in a long while still. The town square, once a place of quiet resignation, now seemed to breathe with life, its buildings covered in a thin layer of snow, sparkling under the fading light of the sun. The bitter cold had melted away, replaced by a crisp, hopeful air. On the porch of their home, Caleb and Maya stood side by side, watching Noah play with the puppies in the yard. Axel, ever the vigilant protector, sat nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the children. The dog's posture was relaxed, his tail gently thumping against the snow as he rested, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes, a reminder of everything they had been through. Caleb felt a sense of peace settle deep within him, something he hadn't known in years. The chaos, the danger, and the shadows that had once haunted him seemed so distant now. In their place was something far more precious: peace, love, and the knowledge that they had all come through the storm stronger for it. He could see it in Noah's face, the boy who had once been filled with fear and uncertainty, now running freely, his laughter filling the air, unhindered by the worries that once consumed him. "They're growing up so fast," Caleb murmured, his voice filled with quiet pride. Maya stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She watched their son, her heart full. "They're the future," she said softly, "just like you and Axel were for me." Caleb smiled and nodded, his eyes never leaving Noah. The boy had come so far from the frightened child who had run to him for help. He had learned the value of courage, loyalty, and love, lessons that Caleb and Axel had passed on to him. And now, watching him play with the puppies, Caleb saw not just the boy he had once been, but the man he was becoming, the man who would carry those lessons forward into the world. "Look at him," Caleb said, his voice quiet with emotion. "He's learned everything we've tried to teach him." Maya's smile was soft and full of understanding. "He's stronger than we ever were. And it's because of you, Caleb. You and Axel." Caleb turned his gaze to Axel, who was sitting calmly on the snow, his eyes focused on Noah. The bond between them was undeniable, a bond that had been forged in moments of fear, courage, and survival. Axel had protected them, guided them, and shown them what loyalty truly meant. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been a symbol of everything Caleb had fought for, a future built on love, trust, and unbreakable loyalty. As the sun dipped lower, casting the town in the last golden light of the day, Caleb, Maya, and Axel stood together in silence, watching Noah play. The world had changed in ways they had never imagined, and the darkness that had once overshadowed their lives had faded. What remained was hope, a hope that the next generation would carry the lessons of love, courage, and sacrifice that had been passed down to them. In the distance, Caleb could hear the faint sound of the wind, but it no longer felt threatening. The wind had carried the echoes of their struggles, but it also carried with it a new beginning, a future for Frost Hollow, a future for Noah, and a future for all of them. They had survived. They had fought, and now they could live. Caleb looked at Maya, then at Axel, and finally at Noah. This was the life he had always wanted, the life that had once seemed out of reach. And in this quiet moment, under the fading light of the sun, he realized that, despite everything they had been through, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The bond between them, Caleb, Maya, Noah, and Axel, was unbreakable. It was a bond forged in loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. And it would last not just in their memories, but in the future they were building together. As we reach the end of this journey, the story of Caleb, Maya, Noah, and Axel serves as a powerful reminder of the transformative power of loyalty, courage, and love. At its core, this story is about more than just overcoming obstacles or confronting evil. It's about the deep, unspoken bond that can form between humans and animals, and how that bond can guide us through even the darkest of times. Axel, the German Shepherd, is not just a dog. He embodies everything that makes our four-legged companions so extraordinary. His unwavering loyalty, his protective instinct, and his ability to sense danger are qualities that we all admire and cherish in our pets. Through Axel, we see the true meaning of selflessness and devotion, a reminder that love comes in many forms. And sometimes it's the simplest gestures, like a dog's protective presence, that can change everything. The story also highlights the importance of unconditional love, the kind of love that Caleb showed to Maya and Noah, and the love Axel showed to them both. It's a love that doesn't judge, that doesn't hesitate, and that stands by us no matter the challenges we face. This love teaches us resilience, perseverance, and the belief that no matter how difficult the road ahead, we are never truly alone. In a world that often feels overwhelming and divided, this story reminds us of the power of connection, compassion, and empathy. It shows us that through kindness and loyalty, whether human or animal, we can overcome fear, find redemption, and build a better future. And in the end, it's these values that truly make us stronger. Just like Axel, we can all be a source of hope and strength for those around us.